Caerphilly Castle, one of the finest and most ambitious architectural creations of medieval Europe. 30 acres. The second largest castle in the UK, the third largest castle in Europe. Yes, this is what you call a castle, and today I'm going to be finding out about the man who designed this immense beast, a man who, depending upon your viewpoint, was either a forward-thinking genius or a deluded, deviously minded egomaniac. Incredibly, this was not the work of a king, but a very wealthy knight. Gilbert the Red de Clare, and as the name suggests, yes, he was a red-headed nobleman of Norman descent. And when he inherited his father's estates in 1263, he became the wealthiest and most powerful man in England, second only to the royal family. He owned land in several counties, including an area of land around Caerphilly, here in the heart of South Wales. But what prompted him to build such an ambitious castle? Well, it all started in 1267, when arch-rival Llewellyn ap Griffith was declared the Prince of Wales by treaty. But the wording was ambiguous. Did upland Glamorgan belong to the Welsh lords, and thus to Llewellyn, or to Gilbert, the Norman lord of the region? Gilbert lost no time in starting work on the castle to defend the land he strongly believed was rightfully his. Now, he went above and beyond what anyone could have imagined, plowing huge amounts of money into making the most formidable fortress of its day. Now, unbelievably, most of the building work was completed within 3 years, from 1268 to 1271. Its magnificence would have no doubt struck fear into the hearts of the local people. The true strength and majesty of the castle lies not only in the scale of the monumental architecture, but also in its outstanding defences, because it's surrounded by two very large moats, as you can see. Now, Gilbert was inspired by the water defences at Kenilworth Castle. So, if you were attacking this castle and you were the enemy, you either had to swim across the moat or travel by boat, leaving you exposed to the soldiers on the inside firing down on you with a very high vantage point. You were literally sitting ducks. It rendered you useless. You couldn't exactly get an accurate aim and fire back. So what you see here is the most fabulous example of 13th century fortified architecture. But there's more. Gilbert was a complex man, and his castle was equally as complex. He was the first person to use concentric walls as a defence mechanism in Britain. Circuits of walls, one inside the other. If the enemy managed to breach the first wall, as they struggled to scale the second, they'd find themselves trapped between the two and easy targets for defenders, firing from above onto their heads. And cleverly, the towers and the gatehouses built closer to the castle are taller. So during a siege, the garrisons on the inner defensive ring could easily fire over their comrades' heads without fear of hitting their own men. Now, in the unlikely event that an army had penetrated both concentric circles and reached the inner island, Gilbert still had some pretty dirty tricks up his sleeve. If the enemy got this far, the defenders were in grave danger, so they had to be pretty determined. A portcullis would be dropped here, right down through that slit, and down here, through the murder holes, hot liquids, missiles and balls of fire would have been dropped down onto the attacking army. Wouldn't want to be in their shoes. But the inner castle walls were never breached, despite being attacked by an army of 10,000 in one siege. And in the late 13th century, the prince was killed in battle in mid-Wales, greatly lessening the threat to Caerphilly. With the prince out of the picture, the danger petered out, and the castle's short life as a frontline fortress came to an end. By the mid-14th century, the castle fell into disrepair and into the hands of various owners. It led a quiet life, with the exception of the Civil War in the 1640s, when the parliamentarians stormed the castle and tried to demolish it to stop the royalists from using it. And it's thought that attack plus natural land subsidence has caused that tower there to lean, and it leans a whopping 10 degrees. Now that's more than the Leaning Tower of Pisa in Italy. In the late 18th century, the Bute family took over Caerphilly and slowly set about its restoration. Today, the only marauding visitors are people like me, who come to simply take in its breathtaking scale and stature. Gilbert created the archetypal concentric fortress, and its design went on to influence many future castles. Undoubtedly, Caerphilly's defences are a little more complex than necessary. Perhaps Gilbert perceived his enemies to be a little more of a threat than they actually were, or perhaps he just built the biggest, strongest castle possible because he could. A medieval show-off, whatever the reason. I'm impressed.